The chill in the air was palpable as I stepped through the wrought iron gates of Ashwood Cemetery. It was a place steeped in history, filled with weathered headstones and ancient oaks whose gnarled branches reached out like skeletal fingers. I had come here for the local history project, but something about the cemetery called to me in a way I couldn't quite explain. As I wandered the winding paths, I was struck by the stillness. The only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot, echoing in the oppressive silence. It was as if the cemetery itself held its breath, waiting for something to happen. My heart raced with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, but I pressed on, eager to uncover the stories buried beneath the moss-covered stones. I stopped at a particularly ornate headstone, its inscription barely legible. As I leaned closer to read it, a gust of wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver down my spine. I glanced around, feeling an unsettling sensation wash over me. It felt as though I were being watched. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, shaking off the unease. I pulled out my notebook and began to jot down notes about the various graves, their histories intertwining in my mind. Suddenly, a faint whisper broke through the stillness. "Help me," it was a soft, almost melodic voice that seemed to drift on the wind. I froze, looking around to see if someone else was nearby. The cemetery was empty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice quaking slightly. No response. I dismissed it as my imagination and continued on, but the whisper lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at my curiosity. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the graves, I decided to explore the oldest section of the cemetery. The stones here were ancient, some cracked and leaning at odd angles. As I moved deeper into this forgotten area, the air grew heavier, and the whispers returned, more insistent this time. "Help me," it felt like a plea, and I found myself drawn toward the source of the sound. I followed it, weaving between the graves until I stumbled upon a small, weathered stone that had been mostly hidden by overgrown grass. It was marked with a name, Eliza Hart, 1823 to 1847. A chill raced down my spine as I knelt beside the grave. The air felt charged, crackling with energy. "What do you need, Eliza?" I asked, half in jest and half in earnest. In response, the whispers crescendoed, a chorus of sorrow that filled my ears. "Help me, find me." Before I could think, I reached out and brushed my fingers over the headstone. It was cold and smooth, and in that moment, I felt a strange connection. I closed my eyes, focusing on the energy swirling around me. I could almost see her, a girl with sorrowful eyes, trapped between worlds. "Find you? Where?" I asked, my heart racing. The wind howled in response, and the ground beneath me seemed to tremble. I opened my eyes, glancing around as shadows danced along the gravestones. A sudden thought struck me. "The cemetery is full of secrets," I murmured. "You're not buried here, are you? You want me to find something else?" The whispers intensified, urging me to dig deeper. Without fully understanding why, I began to search the area around Eliza's grave, brushing away the dirt and leaves. My fingers found something solid, a small, rusted key. I held it up, confusion swirling in my mind. "Is this what you wanted?" I called out, feeling a rush of excitement mixed with fear. The whispers quieted, and for a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat echoing in the silence. Just then, the ground shifted beneath me, and I stumbled back, my heart racing. I looked around, breathless, feeling as though I had awakened something long buried. The shadows thickened, and the whispers turned to urgent pleas. "Help me." The voice was desperate now, echoing through the cemetery. "You must find me." Gathering my courage, I stood up and scanned the area, desperate for answers. I remembered reading about a hidden crypt somewhere in the cemetery, said to hold the remains of those who had been forgotten. It was an old legend, but perhaps Eliza was tied to it. With the key clutched tightly in my hand, I navigated through the graves, following an instinct I couldn't explain. The whispers guided me, urging me onward until I found an old, crumbling mausoleum at the edge of the cemetery. It was overgrown with vines and shadows clung to it like a shroud. As I approached, I noticed a rusty lock on the door that seemed to call to me. My hands trembled as I inserted the key, feeling it fit perfectly. With a gentle turn, the lock clicked open, and I pushed the heavy door ajar. Inside, the air was stale and thick, and the darkness enveloped me like a heavy blanket. I switched on my flashlight, illuminating the interior. Dust motes floated in the beam of light, and I saw a series of crypts lining the walls. I felt a chill run through me as the whispers crescendoed into a frantic chorus. "Help me! Find me!" I stepped further inside, drawn to a crypt at the far end. Its nameplate was obscured by dust, but I could sense the energy radiating from it. As I brushed the dirt away, I revealed the name, Eliza Hart. "Is this your crypt?" I whispered, my heart racing. "What happened to you?" The air thickened, and I felt a rush of emotions wash over me: fear, sadness, longing. I placed my hand on the crypt, and in that instant, the whispers faded into silence. I closed my eyes and focused on the connection I felt with Eliza. "Tell me how to help you," I urged, my voice steady despite the dread clawing at my insides. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air shifted, and I felt a presence beside me. "I am trapped," Eliza's voice echoed in my mind, clearer now. "Free me from this place." "Free you?" I echoed, panic rising within me. "How?" "Release the memories," she said. "The past holds me here. You must remember." Taking a deep breath, I recalled everything I had learned about Eliza's life. She had been a vibrant girl, full of dreams, but tragedy struck. A fire consumed her family home, leaving her lost and alone. She had been buried here, forgotten, her spirit tied to the pain of her past. "I remember," I shouted, the realization washing over me. "You lost everything." With newfound determination, I focused on releasing that memory, allowing the sorrow and pain to flow out of me. I envisioned Eliza, free from her grief, surrounded by the warmth of her family. The room began to shimmer, and I felt a wave of energy surge through me. The crypt trembled, and the whispers returned, rising in a crescendo of hope. "Thank you." Eliza's voice echoed, now filled with joy. "I am free." In a blinding flash of light, the shadows lifted, and the mausoleum filled with warmth. I felt Eliza's presence surround me, wrapping me in a comforting embrace. "You did it," she whispered, her voice now a gentle breeze. As the light faded, I opened my eyes to find myself alone in the crypt. The air was still and calm, the whispers replaced by a profound silence. I stumbled back, overwhelmed by the experience. The key slipped from my fingers and clattered to the ground. I emerged from the mausoleum, breathless, the moonlight illuminating the cemetery with an ethereal glow. Ashwood Cemetery felt transformed, no longer a place of sorrow but a sanctuary of peace. I knew that Eliza was finally free, her spirit at rest. From that day forward, I visited the cemetery often, but it was different now. The weight of the past had lifted, replaced by a sense of serenity. The memories of those who had come before were no longer trapped in the shadows, they whispered tales of love and loss, but now they were echoes of hope. As I walked among the graves, I felt Eliza's presence watching over me, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could emerge, and the whispers of the past could finally be heard. It was an unseasonably warm evening in late October when I found myself wandering through the gates of Willow Bend Cemetery. The sun had begun its descent, casting an orange glow over the headstones, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn to this place for a reason. I had heard rumors about the cemetery, tales of strange lights flickering in the dark, whispers echoing through the trees, but I had never been one to believe in ghosts. Still, curiosity tugged at me like a persistent itch. As I walked along the winding path, I took in the beauty of the place. Old oak trees stood sentinel over the graves, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the vibrant sky. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves, a scent both nostalgic and foreboding. I pulled out my phone to capture a few photos for my social media, hoping to impress my friends with tales of my evening adventure. It wasn't long before I came across a particularly old section of the cemetery, where the stones were worn and weathered, inscriptions barely visible. As I paused to examine one, I felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees. I looked around, the hair on the back of my neck prickling. Just the wind, I told myself, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I shook off the unease and continued walking, until I spotted a dilapidated mausoleum tucked away in a corner, half covered in ivy. It loomed like a dark secret, its entrance gaping open as if inviting me to explore. I approached cautiously, drawn to the mystery of it. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with shadows. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the fading light filtering through the cracks in the walls. My heart raced as I stepped inside, the cool air sending shivers down my spine. The mausoleum was filled with ornate sarcophagi, each one more elaborate than the last. I moved deeper into the space, my flashlight flickering ominously as I scanned the names etched into the stone. They all felt familiar, as if I had heard them in passing stories. One name, however, stood out, Amelia Grayson, 1893 to 1921. I stepped closer, feeling an inexplicable connection. As I traced the letters with my fingers, a sudden noise echoed from the back of the mausoleum, a soft, pleading voice. "Help me." My heart raced, and I spun around, expecting to see someone hiding in the shadows. But the mausoleum was empty. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling slightly. No response came, but the air grew thicker, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. "Help me," the voice came again, clearer this time. It resonated with a sadness that seeped into my bones. I turned back to Amelia's sarcophagus, feeling an overwhelming urge to uncover her story. "What happened to you?" I whispered, half expecting a response. The room grew colder, and I felt the weight of something ancient pressing down on me. As if in response, a vision flashed before my eyes, a glimpse into the past. I saw Amelia, a vibrant young woman with flowing dark hair, her laughter echoing in the halls of a grand home. But the laughter was abruptly silenced as shadows closed in around her, faces twisted in anger, betrayal etched into their features. I gasped, the vision fading just as quickly as it had come, leaving me breathless. I stumbled back, my mind racing. "You were wronged," I murmured. "But how can I help you?" The air around me shifted, and I felt a cold breeze sweep through the mausoleum. I steadied myself, the overwhelming desire to uncover the truth driving me forward. "Show me," I said, determination replacing my fear. I reached for the sarcophagus, my fingers brushing against the cool stone. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones. Suddenly, the mausoleum transformed before my eyes. I was no longer standing in the dusty chamber, but in a lavish parlor, where Amelia stood, her spirit vibrant yet dimmed by sorrow. She turned to me, her eyes filled with desperation. "I was betrayed by those I loved," she said, her voice echoing like a distant bell. "They wanted my fortune, my life. I was silenced to keep their secrets." The vision shifted again, revealing the faces of her family, greed shining in their eyes as they conspired against her. I felt anger boil within me. "They took everything from you," I said, my heart aching for her. "Help me find peace," she pleaded, her form flickering like a dying flame. "Expose the truth. Only then can I rest." I nodded, determination coursing through me. "I will. I promise." The vision faded, and I found myself back in the mausoleum, breathless and filled with purpose. I had to uncover Amelia's story, to reveal the darkness that had surrounded her life and death. I stumbled out of the mausoleum, the night air hitting me like a wave. In the days that followed, I delved into local archives and family records, unearthing the tangled web of deceit surrounding Amelia Grayson. I discovered that her family had indeed plotted against her, driven by greed and jealousy. They had been the cause of her untimely death, buried beneath layers of lies. One name kept appearing: Victor Grayson, Amelia's cousin, the one who stood to gain the most from her demise. I felt a rush of anger as I pieced together the truth. They had silenced her, but now I could give her a voice. Armed with evidence, I returned to Willow Bend Cemetery, my heart pounding with purpose. I stood before Amelia's grave, the weight of the past heavy upon me. "I know the truth now," I declared, my voice steady. "You will be remembered." As I spoke, a gentle breeze swept through the cemetery, swirling around me like a protective embrace. The shadows began to shift, and I felt Amelia's presence beside me, her spirit glowing with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like a soft caress. "You have given me hope." With a final surge of energy, the air around us shimmered, and I could see the outlines of her family, the faces of her betrayers, their guilt and shame etched into their features. "Your secrets will be uncovered," I promised, feeling the weight of their darkness lift. As the night deepened, the cemetery felt transformed. The oppressive atmosphere faded, replaced by a sense of peace. I stood there for what felt like hours, the cool breeze wrapping around me like a warm blanket. I knew Amelia was finally free, her story no longer lost in the shadows. From that day forward, I visited Willow Bend Cemetery often, leaving flowers at Amelia's grave, sharing her story with anyone who would listen. I felt a bond with her, knowing that I had played a part in bringing her justice. The cemetery, once a place of fear and sorrow, became a sanctuary of remembrance and light. And as I jogged past the gates, I would smile, knowing that the spirits of the forgotten were no longer silenced, their stories woven into the fabric of the world. I nodded, tears brimming in my eyes. "Thank you for trusting me." With that, the shadows melted away, and the cemetery felt lighter, filled with the echoes of laughter and joy that had long been silenced. I stepped outside, the moon shining bright overhead, and for the first time, I felt truly at peace. From that day forward, I knew I would carry their stories with me, a reminder that even in death, the voices of the lost deserve to be heard. And as I jogged past Gravesend Cemetery, I smiled, knowing that its secrets were no longer buried in darkness, but illuminated by the light of remembrance. It was a crisp autumn evening when I first stumbled upon Gravesend Cemetery. I was out for a late jog, the dying light casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. I didn't mean to venture so far, but something about the cemetery's weathered gate drew me in. It stood slightly ajar, as if inviting me to explore its secrets. As I entered, a gust of wind swept through the trees, sending a cascade of leaves spiraling to the ground. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the air itself was alive with stories waiting to be told. I felt an odd mix of excitement and dread, but I pressed on, my curiosity outweighing my apprehension. The cemetery was surprisingly beautiful in its decay. Ancient headstones, some toppled and others half buried in the earth, lined the winding paths. I walked slowly, running my fingers over the moss-covered stones, trying to read the faded inscriptions. Each grave whispered tales of lives long gone, and for a moment, I felt like an intruder in a world that had forgotten me. As I wandered deeper, I noticed a clearing where the trees parted to reveal a large, ornate mausoleum. Its stone facade was intricately carved, depicting scenes of angels and demons locked in eternal conflict. Something about it felt off, like it was watching me, waiting. I approached cautiously, feeling an inexplicable pull. The door was slightly ajar, and without thinking, I pushed it open. Inside, The air was thick and musty, a stark contrast to the fresh breeze outside. I turned on my phone's flashlight, illuminating the interior. It was lined with dusty sarcophagi, each one bearing a name I couldn't make out. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing in the silence. No response came, but the shadows seemed to dance in my flashlight's beam, alive with a peculiar energy. I stepped further inside, my heart racing. In the center of the mausoleum stood an ornate pedestal, upon which rested a beautiful, old book. It looked out of place amidst the decay, its cover gleaming even in the dim light. Curiosity piqued, I approached and opened it. The pages were filled with names and dates, each followed by an inscription that read like an epitaph. "Here lies Thomas, who loved fiercely but lost tragically. Here lies Lydia, who sought justice but found only despair." A shiver ran down my spine as I realized these were not just names, they were stories of those who had been wronged, their lives cut short or filled with sorrow. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the mausoleum, extinguishing my flashlight. I fumbled in the darkness, panic rising in my chest. Just then, a soft, mournful voice broke the silence, sending chills coursing through me. "Help us." My heart raced. "Who's there?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely a whisper. The shadows shifted around me, coalescing into a figure, a woman in a flowing white dress, her face pale and sorrowful. "I am Clara," she said, her voice echoing like a distant bell. "I have waited long for someone to listen. What do you want?" I asked, fear gripping me. "Those who are forgotten must not be left to suffer," she replied, gesturing to the book. "Each name is a plea for remembrance, a story left untold. You can help us." "What can I do?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "Find their resting places," she instructed, her gaze piercing through me. "Bring light to their stories, and their spirits will be freed." Before I could respond, Clara's figure flickered, and she was gone, leaving me alone in the oppressive darkness. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short gasps. I felt the weight of her words pressing down on me, and despite my fear, I knew I had to act. Determined to help, I retrieved my phone and turned the flashlight back on. I focused on the book, hoping to find clues. As I flipped through the pages, one name stood out, Evelyn Carter, 1921 to 1943. I recognized the name from the town's history. She was another young woman who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. I felt a sense of urgency wash over me. I had to find her grave. With the book as my guide, I left the mausoleum and ventured back into the cemetery, my heart racing with each step. The moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows that danced in the corners of my vision. I scanned the headstones, looking for Evelyn's name. After what felt like an eternity, I found her grave in a secluded corner, surrounded by overgrown weeds. The headstone was cracked, and the inscription was barely legible, but I could make out her name. I knelt beside it, brushing away the debris. "Evelyn," I whispered, feeling a strange connection to her story. "I'm here to remember you." As I spoke, a gust of wind whipped through the cemetery, swirling around me like a storm. I closed my eyes, focusing on the energy in the air. "Tell me your story," I urged. In an instant, images flooded my mind, a vibrant young woman with laughter that filled the air, her dreams cut short by betrayal and despair. I saw glimpses of her life, a love that turned sour, and a darkness that consumed her. I gasped as I realized she had been silenced, her truth buried along with her. The ground trembled beneath me, and I felt a surge of energy. "I won't forget you," I promised, my voice steady. "I'll make sure your story is told." With newfound determination, I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, Clara appeared once more. "You have begun to awaken them," she said, her eyes shining with hope. "But there are more to find. The keeper of the lost must not rest until all are remembered." I nodded, feeling a sense of purpose swell within me. I spent the next several nights returning to the cemetery, uncovering the stories of those forgotten. Each name in the book led me to another grave, each visit awakening memories and allowing their spirits to speak through me. As I brought light to their stories, the cemetery transformed. The once oppressive shadows receded, replaced by a warmth that lingered in the air. Clara and the other spirits watched over me, their gratitude palpable. On my final visit, I returned to the mausoleum one last time. The book had grown heavier in my hands, filled with stories of those whose lives had been intertwined with loss and tragedy. I placed it back on the pedestal, knowing it was time for others to carry on this legacy. As I turned to leave, Clara stood beside me, a radiant smile illuminating her face. "You have freed them," she said softly. "And in doing so, you have freed yourself." I had never intended to visit Hollow Creek Cemetery at night, but there I was, flashlight in hand, the moonlight casting eerie shadows on the weathered stones. The cemetery had a reputation in our town, whispered tales of strange occurrences and sightings of ghostly figures roaming between the graves. As a curious and somewhat skeptical teenager, I couldn't resist the allure of uncovering the truth. My friends dared me to explore after dark, convinced that I would run away screaming. But I felt a mix of bravado and apprehension as I entered through the wrought iron gates, their hinges creaking like the groans of long-forgotten souls. The moment I stepped inside, an unsettling feeling washed over me, but I pressed on, determined to prove them wrong. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl sent a shiver down my spine. I flicked on my flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness, illuminating the gravestones that jutted from the ground like jagged teeth. I paused at a particularly old grave, its stone cracked and covered in moss. As I studied the inscription, a chill raced through me. The name read Evelyn Blackwood, 1897 to 1919. I had heard stories about her, a young woman who had mysteriously vanished from town, her body never found. Some said she had been cursed, others whispered of dark magic. I felt an odd compulsion to linger, as if her spirit were calling out to me. "Evelyn," I whispered, half jokingly. The air around me felt charged, and I could have sworn I heard a faint reply, a whisper carried on the wind, "Help me." I dismissed it as my imagination, but my heart raced. I wandered deeper into the cemetery, drawn by a strange energy. The moon cast ghostly shadows that danced among the graves, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Each step felt heavier, and the darkness seemed to close in around me. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged as I fumbled with the switch, but nothing happened. The silence was deafening, and in that moment, I felt a presence looming nearby. I could almost feel the weight of eyes watching me from the shadows. "Okay, this isn't funny," I said aloud, trying to steady my breath. But my voice echoed back, mocking me. I took a step back, only to trip over something hard. I landed on the ground with a thud, the air knocked out of my lungs. As I regained my composure, I felt a cold breeze sweep past me. I turned my head, and in the faint light of the moon, I saw her, a figure standing at the edge of the graveyard. She wore a long, tattered dress, her hair cascading around her shoulders like a dark waterfall. My heart raced as I realized it was Evelyn. "Help me," she repeated, her voice a haunting melody that sent chills down my spine. "Evelyn," I called, scrambling to my feet. "What do you need?" She raised her hand, pointing to a nearby mausoleum that loomed in the shadows, its entrance shrouded in darkness. I felt an overwhelming urge to follow her, despite every instinct screaming at me to run. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I had to see what she wanted. As I approached the mausoleum, the air grew colder. I pushed open the heavy door, its creaking hinges echoing in the stillness. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of mold and decay. I turned on my phone's flashlight, the beam revealing rows of crypts lined against the stone walls. Evelyn. I called, my voice trembling. Are you here? The darkness swallowed my words, but I could feel her presence. It wrapped around me like a shroud, pulling me deeper into the mausoleum. I hesitated, unsure of what awaited me, but something compelled me to move forward. At the back of the mausoleum, I found a crypt that stood slightly ajar. The stone was etched with her name. I felt a rush of emotions, fear, sadness, and an inexplicable connection. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. Please, I whispered, looking around as if someone else might hear me. What happened to you? As I stood before the crypt, I felt a sudden surge of energy, and the air crackled with tension. The whispers returned, swirling around me, "Help me." I reached out to touch the stone, and in that moment, I felt a rush of memories flood my mind. Images of a young woman filled with joy, laughter, and love, quickly overshadowed by darkness, an argument, betrayal, and finally, a cold, dark void. Evelyn. I gasped, backing away as the memories overwhelmed me. You were betrayed. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shook, and the whispers grew louder, becoming a cacophony of desperate cries. Release me, they wailed, echoing through the crypt. I fell to my knees, heart racing, and as I did, I noticed something glinting in the shadows beside the crypt. I crawled closer, brushing away the dirt to reveal a small locket. I opened it, revealing a picture of Evelyn and a man I didn't recognize, smiling and carefree. This must be him, I muttered, realizing he must have been the one who betrayed her. He trapped you here. The air grew thick with sorrow, and I felt a wave of anguish wash over me. I understood now, Evelyn needed closure. She couldn't move on until the truth was revealed. With newfound determination, I clutched the locket and stood. I'll help you, I promised, feeling the weight of her spirit behind me. I'll find out what happened and set you free. As I turned to leave the mausoleum, the air shifted again, and I felt the presence of Evelyn by my side. The whispers faded, replaced by a gentle breeze that wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. I rushed back home, fueled by adrenaline and fear, determined to dig deeper into Evelyn's past. Over the next few days, I scoured the local archives, searching for anything related to her name. I uncovered her story, a tragic love affair that had ended in betrayal and despair. Evelyn's lover had been involved in dark rituals, and when she discovered his true intentions, he had silenced her forever, burying her in the cemetery and ensuring her spirit would remain trapped. Armed with this knowledge, I knew what I had to do. That night, I returned to Hollow Creek Cemetery, the locket clutched tightly in my hand. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the gravestones. I made my way to Evelyn's crypt, my heart pounding with each step. Standing before the crypt, I raised the locket high. Evelyn. I know the truth. I called out. You were betrayed, but I will make it right. The air thickened, and I felt a surge of energy as the shadows gathered around me. Release me, the whispers urged, but this time they were filled with hope. I took a deep breath, focusing on the connection I felt with Evelyn. You deserve justice, I proclaimed, and in that moment, the locket began to glow, illuminating the darkness around me. The whispers rose to a crescendo, and I felt Evelyn's presence intensify. I closed my eyes and envisioned her, free from the pain of the past, surrounded by love. You are free, Evelyn, I whispered, my voice steady. With a final surge of energy, the shadows around me dissipated, and the air filled with warmth. I opened my eyes to see a brilliant light enveloping the crypt, and in the center stood Evelyn, her form radiant and whole. Thank you, she whispered, her voice a gentle breeze. I am free. As the light faded, I felt her presence dissolve into the night, leaving me alone in the cemetery. The air was calm now, the weight of sorrow lifted. I knew Evelyn had finally found peace. From that day on, Hollow Creek Cemetery felt different. The shadows no longer loomed menacingly, and the whispers that once filled the air were now a soft melody of remembrance. I visited often, leaving flowers at her grave, knowing she was finally at rest, her spirit no longer bound by the darkness of betrayal. And in my heart, I carried her story, a reminder that even in the deepest shadows, the light of truth could shine through.